We obsess over Disney princess style just as much as you do. But did you know that their looks don't actually match up to their places in history? Here's how their clothes, makeup, and hair should have looked like if they were historically accurate. Rapunzel's lace-up purple dress is almost as much her signature look as her long blonde hair. But to be totally on point with historical accuracy, we need to make some tweaks to her gown. According to the producers, Tangled was set in the 1780s, and at that time, most wealthy women still favored a two-piece style of dress called a robe l'anglaise. This consisted of a split-skirt robe that lay open over the top of an underskirt. This petticoat was often heavily decorated and embellished. Snaps to Disney for lacing up the front of the bodice. That's spot on. But we need to make it whiter, and we need to change the color scheme. That bold shade is way too modern, and by that we mean it's so vivid. It would have been down to chemical dyes, which weren't in use back then. Rapunzel's gown should be a lighter, mauvey pink hue. Of course, we need to talk about the hair. Naturally, Rapunzel has to wear it long, no matter what time period she's from, and she wears it straight and slicked down her scalp. But to fit into this decade of the 18th century, it would have been seriously curly and big all around her head instead, in this on-trend style they called the hedgehog. No, really, we're not kidding. It's quite the difference when we view the two looks side by side, right? It's said that Frozen is set in the 1830s to 40s, so the fashion should take inspiration from the late Regency and early Victorian eras, not to mention Scandinavian royalty back then. However, Elsa's famous blue ice dress is much more modern. So let's rewind to get a more accurate version. Let's start with her bodice. Its definition is down at the waist, but actually at that time, fashion was all about the Empire line. The fashionable silhouette raised the waistline all the way up to just under the bust, with the gown then flowing down loosely from that point. Sorry, Elsa, no slinky, skin-skimming skirt for you. And certainly no leg slit. You can keep the cape, but we just need to make some adjustments. Rather than gauzy, it would have been made from thicker, embellished fabric. And forget about the off-the-shoulder neckline. You need puffed-up sleeves covering your shoulders, please. As for hairstyles, women of a certain age wouldn't have worn their locks in a hanging braid back then. That style was reserved for the privacy of their bedchamber. In public, Elsa would have worn her hair up in a fancy do, much like the style she rocked at her coronation. Regency style is much more demure, but we can't help but love Elsa's Ice Palace cabaret style. Of course, we can't include Elsa and not include Anna. But to keep things interesting, we've analyzed what her more casual outfit would have looked like. Disney didn't stray too far from the traditional folk fashion of Norway at the time, but there are a few changes we need to make to really nail the historical accuracy. First of all, Anna's trademark cloak isn't typical of that region or that time. Women wore layers to stay warm, so we need to thicken it up and make it into a practical shawl instead. Her black bodice is more Swedish than Norwegian. She would have worn a white blouse with a colorful high-collared woolen jacket over the top. She would have worn a neck scarf too. That would have come in handy on her trip to the North Mountain after all. As for her skirt, she wouldn't have had all that fancy floral embroidery. It would have more likely been simply striped, with a bit of a decorative trim at the hem. We need to switch Anna's boots, which women didn't wear, for patterned stockings and flats. To finish, let's give Anna instant hair extensions. She can keep the braids. That's the style young, unmarried women wore, but they never cut their hair. These side-by-side looks aren't too dissimilar, are they? Tiana's huge dress with its puffy skirt sure gives the princess vibe. But it sure isn't in line with what women wore in 1920s New Orleans. The Jazz Age was all about flapper-style dresses, with dropped waists and straight skirts in slinky materials. Think Carey Mulligan in The Great Gatsby. The floor-length hemline needs to raise up several inches, all the way toward her knees. Tiana's big high bun is also typical of Disney princesses, dating all the way back to Cinderella, but her do is a don't for her actual time and place in history. Rather than long hair held in an updo, the women of that period wore their hair short and slicked down in waves. As for hair accessories, Tiana needs to swap that flower crown for a feathered headpiece. Moving on to her other accessories, let's switch the short string of jewels around her neck for a very long beaded necklace stretching all the way to her waist. You know what Disney did get right though? Those elbow-length gloves. We love Tiana's Great Gatsby makeover compared to her standard princess attire. What about you? The costume designer for Moana did a lot of research to create both geographically and historically accurate outfits for the Polynesian princess. The Pacific Trust even sent representatives to Disney with textile samples. So the materials, colors, and style of Moana's crop top and skirt aren't a million miles away from reality. But they had to take into consideration the animation process too, like the slit in the skirt, which was included to allow for greater movement on screen. If we look at clothing in Tonga and Samoa 2,000 years ago, it's plainer than what we see on Moana. Rather than intricately patterned tapa material, Moana would have more likely worn a simpler swirl. And if you thought the crop top was a bit revealing, actually, tops weren't typically worn at all. But let's just keep that top right where it is for now. As for the rest of Moana's look, she probably would have had tattoos as well, particularly on her arms, shoulders, and chest. Her ink might have even extended to a tattooed necklace. So with her pendant holding the heart of Te Fiti, Moana would have rocked double bling. Her hair should be thicker and shorter, worn in tighter curls and just shoulder length. Now, we know there isn't too much difference, but what do you think of these two looks? So, now you've seen these 5 Disney princesses with their historically accurate looks. Do you prefer these outfits to their original style? Be sure to tell us your thoughts in the comments section below, and let us know which princess is your favorite. Thanks for watching!